In the summer of 1914, as Europe stood on the threshold of history's most devastating conflict, the world was still struggling to transition from one energy age to another. Coal was the fuel of the Industrial Revolution, powering railways, billowing from factory chimneys, and driving the warships of every great power across the seas. Yet few people at the time could grasp that the substance which would ultimately determine the war's outcome was not coal, but a dark liquid lying hundreds of meters beneath the Earth's surface. That substance was oil. And the country that understood this first acted with the boldness of a great gambler, Britain. This story begins 2 years before the war, in 1912. Winston Churchill, the young and ambitious head of the Admiralty, had joined a meeting in one of London's dimly lit conference rooms to discuss the future of the Royal Navy. He arrived armed with countless technical reports, engineering analyses, and intelligence documents. The problem was clear. The German Empire was rapidly building a growing naval fleet, and Britain's supremacy at sea was under threat. But what troubled Churchill most was not the size or number of the ships, it was how they worked. A coal-powered warship was formidable, but slow, heavy, and a logistical nightmare. Crew members had to haul coal for hours on end, and the boilers required constant maintenance. Yet a new fuel system had been observed in several Mediterranean naval exercises. Fuel oil. Ships running on oil were faster, far easier to refuel, and dramatically less dependent on human labor. Most importantly, they could travel farther, faster, and with greater power. Churchill made his decision. The Royal Navy would convert from coal to oil. But behind this decision lay an enormous paradox. Britain was the world's largest producer of coal. The Welsh mines heated the heart of the empire, and British coal was exported across the globe. Oil, however, was an entirely different story. Not a single drop of crude oil existed on British soil. This meant that the transformation Churchill was proposing was not merely a technical matter, it was a question of survival. Britain was advancing with its eyes fixed on an enormous geopolitical risk. It would become dependent on external sources it could not produce at home and did not control. If those sources were cut off, the Navy would be paralyzed. If the supply routes were severed, the war would be lost. This was far more than a diplomatic maneuver. It was a decision to bind the nation's fate to ground in foreign lands. So why was such a great risk taken? Because Churchill and his advisors could see the future. War was no longer won solely at sea. Motorized vehicles were being brought to the front lines, aviation was being born, and supply routes were being motorized. In the wars of the near future, oil, not coal, would be the decisive factor. And those who fell behind in this race would lose everything. It was at precisely this moment that one of history's most remarkable financial maneuvers took the stage. In 1908, near the town of Masjid Suleiman in southern Iran, a drilling crew from a British company had burst into wild celebration. A dark liquid was gushing up from the earth. The Middle East's first major oil reserve had been discovered. The company behind that discovery was the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. The company was operating under concession agreements signed with Iranian landowners and was going through a financially painful period. Shareholders were anxious, investors were fleeing, and the company's future was uncertain. It was in the midst of this crisis that Churchill's ministry stepped in. In May 1914, a historic proposal was brought before the British Parliament. The government would purchase 51% of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company's shares, thereby becoming its largest shareholder. Approximately £2 million would be drawn from the Treasury for this purpose, a sum equivalent to hundreds of millions of pounds in today's value. The debates in Parliament were fierce. Opposition spokesmen took the floor and voiced the dangers of the state becoming so deeply entangled in a commercial enterprise. Some denounced it as a scandal. England is not an oil company, some declared. Churchill stood at the podium and spoke for hours. His arguments were clear. The Navy must convert to oil immediately. Oil supply must be secured, and the only way to secure it is through state control. On May 29, 1914, the bill passed. The British government became the majority shareholder of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Just 2 months later, the first shots rang out across Europe. In the early years of the war, the importance of oil began to reveal itself gradually. While trenches were being dug on the Western Front, a new war machine was appearing on the battlefield that would alter the balance between the German and Allied armies. Motorized vehicles. First came the trucks used to transport thousands of soldiers, then the motorized vehicles hauling heavy artillery, and finally the supply networks behind the front lines. All of it ran on oil. Germany's situation was growing increasingly dire. The German Navy was dependent on coal, which made Churchill's foreseen disadvantage clearer with each passing day. German U-boats ran on oil, but the bulk of the surface fleet still operated on older technology. More critically, Germany had no significant oil source of its own. It was attempting to obtain oil from Romania, the Ottoman Empire, and various trade routes, but the British naval blockade was largely choking off these channels. Britain, meanwhile, was fueling the Royal Navy with oil flowing from Iran. The speed advantage was real. British destroyers and dreadnought battleships powered by oil reached speeds their rivals could not match. This difference saved lives in open sea engagements. But oil's role in the war was not limited to the seas. In 1916, during the Battle of the Somme, a new weapon appeared on the battlefield that shocked the world and permanently demonstrated the importance of oil in land warfare: the tank. Developed by British engineers and known as the Mark I, these heavy armored vehicles were first deployed on September 15, 1916. Poor weather, mud, and mechanical failures constrained this initial use, but the message was unmistakable. Breaking through the front required steel and oil. Tanks ran on petrol, and that fuel came from Iranian wells thousands of kilometers away. The air forces told the same story. As British and French aircraft grew increasingly sophisticated, the quality and quantity of fuel became a strategic priority. Germany was forced to cut short some training programs due to oil shortages, and several operations were delayed. The British, with their broader fuel supply chain, were able to rapidly expand their aviation programs. The Middle Eastern Front was the least told yet most critical chapter of this story. When the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany and Austro-Hungary, Mesopotamia and the Gulf region became a vital theater of conflict for the British. The Indian Army landed at Basra and advanced northward toward Baghdad. The motivations for this campaign were multifaceted, but the security of oil sources and pipelines was at the top of the list. The areas around Mosul had not yet been fully explored, but were giving strong indications of harboring major reserves. At the same time, British agents and diplomats were quietly at work across the Arabian Peninsula. Secret agreements with Sharif Hussein were encouraging the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. Many geopolitical calculations lay behind this uprising, but maintaining control over oil pipelines and supply routes was an inseparable part of that equation. By 1917, another development shifted the course of the war. The United States entered the conflict. Transporting American military power to Europe required a massive logistical operation, fueled largely by American and British oil companies. But even at this point, a crisis erupted. In 1917, intense German U-boat attacks threatened the tanker fleet in the Atlantic. Fuel shortages came close to paralyzing French and British forces on the Western Front. The warning from British naval intelligence was stark. If this crisis could not be resolved within 3 months, the war might be lost. When this warning was conveyed to the British cabinet, the Lloyd George government took extraordinary measures. The tanker fleet was reorganized, convoy systems were improved, and critical fuel supply lines were secured. The crisis was averted, but it had once again made unmistakably clear that winning the war without oil was impossible. When Germany signed the armistice in November 1918, analyses emerging from both the victors and the vanquished arrived at a similar conclusion. This war had been won not with coal, but with oil. The Speaker of the French Senate delivered a notable address in the aftermath of the peace negotiations. He described oil as the fifth great power of the war, the first four being the British, French, Russian, and American armies. This phrase resonated so powerfully that it was retold over the years by statesmen and historians alike. Similar assessments appeared in the internal departments of the British Foreign Office. The pre-war investment in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was recognized as one of the most profitable state investments in history. A share purchase of just £2 million had secured Britain's access to a reliable and sustainable oil source throughout the entire war. The line connecting Churchill's 1912 vision, his financial boldness in 1914, and the victory of 1918 bore the traces of a rare and remarkable strategic consistency. Yet this victory did not come without a price. The new borders drawn across the Middle East, the secret agreements signed, and the great power rivalry over the region introduced some of the 20th century's greatest tensions onto the world stage. The artificial borders drawn by the Sykes-Picot Agreement, borders that largely disregarded the ethnic and cultural fabric of the peoples living there, became one of the root causes of conflicts that continue to this day. The strategic calculations made for oil left deep and lasting marks on the fates of entire peoples. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, meanwhile, transformed, grew, and changed its name over time. It first became the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and then in 1954, following the nationalization of Iranian oil and the political upheavals that came after it, became BP, British Petroleum, which remains to this day one of the world's largest energy companies. A state investment that began with £2 million had come to carry the seeds of a century-old global energy giant. History shows that decisions which appear small can produce enormous consequences, that a technological choice can shape an entire century, that the purchase of a stock can change the outcome of a war, and that a single vision can continue to echo for decades. Britain's oil gamble was precisely that, a decision made in the face of uncertainty, one that placed its signature beneath a massive financial and strategic risk, yet ultimately stood on the right side of history's turning. The words Churchill spoke from the floor of Parliament, "Safety and certainty in oil," summarized not merely a naval policy, but the energy order of the modern world. And today, more than a century later, our world continues to live within an order built upon the oil drawn from those wells. Everything has changed since that November morning when the First World War came to an end, but one thing has not. He who controls energy controls power.